So as I announced by email last time, the problem set, the first problem set is not due today. It's due on Friday at class time. Partly that's due to the Wiley Plus problem on Monday, which is evidently now resolved. It's also due to the fact that I didn't get in class to talk about work and energy properly, and I want to. So let me start off doing that. Any questions about problem set stuff before I start this? All right. As basically a spoiler alert, what's the point of showing you about ramps? The real point about showing you about ramps is that ramps allow you to do something useful. They allow you to lift, to raise heavy objects that you couldn't simply lift up straight up. They allow you to lift those objects by going along the ramp. So let me make a ramp out of this thing. And actually, let me make it reasonably high. I can take this wagon, and I'll leave the heavy kid out just because I can. I can lift the wagon from this height to this height, and I'm picking the top of the ramp as the height. I can go straight up like this. And if I do that at constant velocity, so I lift it upward steadily, 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 and then to this height. And there's something funny at the start and stop of my movement, which I'll come back to. But that steady lift, I'm using a pretty significant force because I have to support the whole weight of the wagon myself. I have to keep it from falling, and in fact, I have to allow it to coast up. So the net force on it's 0, which means I'm pushing up just as hard as gravity's pulling down. So I managed to raise the wagon that high with a big force exerted over that distance. All right? The alternative, and this is what the ramp allows you to do, is to go to that same elevation using actually a smaller force. I could do this with one finger, if you can aim, and I'm raising it to that same height, and I did it with a smaller force, but there's a consequence. I had to move it a longer distance. Instead of traveling just this distance, I had to travel this distance, much farther. And sort of, is there a physics story behind this? And the answer naturally is yes. Quite an important physics story. So that's the preview of where we're going, is that the ramps allow you to use small forces to lift things, to raise things, but in exchange for long distances traveled while exerting those forces. And so where's the physics in this? And the physics has to do with energy and work. So in way too short a blather, I spit out the concept of energy and work last time. So let me do it carefully. Energy is yet another physical quantity. I mean, I've talked about 5 of them, velocity, position, acceleration, mass, force. So here's a new one, energy. Energy differs from those previous 5 I guess in a variety of ways. It is a scalar quantity, okay? The fancy name for a quantity that has no direction. It's just an amount, energy is. What's special about it and distinguishes it, I should be a little careful, makes it different from most of those other physical quantities, is it's conserved. And conserved has a special meaning in physics. And it's not that different from the meaning that you're used to in common language. But in physics, what a conserved quantity has going for it is that it's a quantity that is specially protected. You can't create it or destroy it. And so therefore, if you start with a certain amount of one of these conserved quantities, you're going to end with that same amount. Unless, for example, you give it away to something or you get more from somewhere else. It can move around, but you can't just make it vanish. In contrast to something like velocity, you can make velocity vanish. I have a velocity right now that's to the right 2 meters per second, a couple feet per second, and now it's 0. It vanished. No one cared. It's not conserved. It's not special. Energy is special. You can't destroy it. Can't create it. So it moves around, and actually watching it move is really useful It allows you to get insights into all kinds of things as you see it go. Insight energy is the energy that's used in common language for the most part. It's not like the energy you have after you've had 7 cups of coffee, but it is the same energy that we worry about, like running out of energy or solar energy. It's the same energy. So it's conserved. It's the conserved quantity of doing things. If you've got extra energy, you can do things that you couldn't do with less energy. So we'll see later on there are other conserved quantities that involve motion, not energy. Energy can involve motion, but it doesn't have to. So energy is conserved. It moves between objects. And my analogy for this, just to flesh it out, my analogy for energy is it's like money. Money is, don't do high finance and stuff. Just in ordinary everyday use, money moves around between people. You Venmo each other money. Your account goes down, their account goes up, and so on, stuff like that. You can't create or destroy it within the system. It just moves around, right? Energy moves around the same way, and the way in which you move it around is mechanically by doing work on something. So how do you do work on something? So if I do work on something, I give it some of my energy. My energy budget goes down, its energy budget or balance goes up. How do you do work? And this is something that in effect, physicists have no control over. It's given to us by nature and how we observe nature. So you can go anywhere in the universe and settle into some new community out there and wherever. They're going to have the same definition for energy and work. They have to. It's just there in nature. So to do work on something, the recipe, well, the rule is very simple. It involves sort of forget all the details outside. The story can be very complicated. All that matters is, for me to do work on this ball, I have to push on it. That's item 1. I have to exert a force on it. Item number 2 is it has to move a distance in the direction of my force. So I'm currently pushing up on the ball. Not hard to realize that I'm supporting its weight. And I'm going to push up on it, and I'm going to begin to move it upward, which involves some fluctuations in how hard I push and stuff. But the details, don't worry about them. Just realize that I am pushing up on it, and it's moving in the direction of my push. I just transferred energy to it by way of work. I did physical work on it. And let me end the story and just bring this down so I don't stand there with my hand in the air all the time. The amount of work that I did is very specific. It's the product of my force, how strong I pushed, and how far it moved in the direction of that force. So if I move it up halfway, I did half as much work. I transferred half as much energy as if I move it all the way up, because I only went half the distance. Is that okay? And you can see it now is able to do things that it couldn't do before. If I hold it over somebody's head in the front row, it's more threatening like this than it was like this. So you're sort of comfortable with it having more energy than it started with. That's not too surprising. If I start up here with it chock full of energy, and I'll talk in a minute about where that energy is, and I lower it, I'm still pushing up on it, even though it's coming down. This is one of these things that you got to wrap your head around. You can push on something upward and have it move downward. It's okay, it happens. I pushed up on it, it moved the wrong way, opposite my force. Therefore, I did a negative amount of work on it, or just negative work. You can do that. I gave it less than no energy, and it went down in energy. This is equivalent. So this is the equivalent of me giving cash to the ball. So I gave it $5. It's got more money than it used to. I have less. And so that energy came out of my, my breakfast cereal, which you eat energy actually, and I just transferred some of it to the ball. So it's got a certain amount of energy, analogously to having a certain amount of money. This takes the energy back out of it, equivalent to taking money back out of it. All right? You might wonder, okay, so where did the energy go in me? This was my breakfast cereal becoming energy in the ball, being transferred to the ball. This is the ball's energy coming back into me, and what am I doing with it? I squander it. I turn it into thermal energy, which we'll come to pretty soon. Thermal energy is good old-fashioned energy. It's the same stuff. It's just chopped up into little pieces you can't do much with. It's sprinkled around all throughout me. It shows up as in my temperature. My temperature went up a little bit. All right? Any questions so far about the act of doing work and putting energy into something taken out? All the details, I should say, stuff like, a lot of the details just don't matter. For example, the work that you do on something, the work I do on the ball is how hard I push on it and how far it moves in the direction of my push. Where I got that energy from does not matter. So if instead of doing this and using energy that I got from my cereal, I rode an elevator lifting me upward, and suddenly I'm doing this. Hi guys, going up to the second floor. I'm still doing work on the ball. Same amount. I lifted it that high. The fact that I got the energy out of the elevator, who cares? Just look at the act of pushing and how far it moved. All right? So anyway, you can watch energy move around. Last details to look at with this are, if you push on it and it moves at right angles to your push, it's not moving a distance in the direction of your force or opposite your direction of force. It's moving irrelevantly. So this, I'm not doing any work on it to the extent that I'm moving steadily. During that time, I'm pushing up and it's moving to the right. I'm neither making progress in the direction of the force or opposite direction of the force. No work is done. And the ball's energy wasn't changing during that process. All right? It didn't get any higher or lower. Let me set that aside. See what I wanted to say next, if anything. Yeah, is energy transferred when you lower the ball? Yes. It's transferred, in effect, from the ball to me. The exchange actually is complete when I lift the ball up. So I'm pushing up on it, it's moving upward. I'm giving it energy. From its perspective, look at what's happening. It's pushing down. Let me get the ball. I'm going to go lighter here. I'll wear out. So on this process, I push up and it moves up. I do work on it. I give it energy. But from its perspective, it's pushing down on my hand, and my hand is moving up the wrong way. It's doing negative work on my hand. It's taking the same amount of energy out of me that I put into it. The exchange is perfect. It's like if I give you $5, your budget, your balance of money goes up $5. At the same time, you are taking $5 away from me, and my money goes down by $5. It's a complete transfer. The same thing's happening here. The energy I put into the ball is taken out of me. And that may be just for more detail than you need to pay attention to, but that's that's in effect why energy is conserved. The same amount I put in is taken out of me. About language. This is work. I'm doing work on the ball. This is negative work. I'm doing a negative amount of work on the ball. I didn't use the word positive. Like, this is positive work, this is negative work. Well, we just assume the positive unless otherwise stated. If you do work on something, we assume you did a positive amount. If I write it in a question, did you do work on the passing bicycle? And it wasn't a positive amount, then the answer is no. It's just a convention. Negative quantities are, there are many circumstances in which you will explicitly say negative. Like if you give money to charity, it's my standard joke, so you may have heard it before, but if I give money to charity, everybody assumes that I gave a positive amount of money to charity. If I gave the charitable organization my mortgage, and therefore my debt, their money goes down, mine goes up. we assume that didn't happen, right? So work is positive unless otherwise assumed positive unless explicitly said negative. Questions about that idea? All right. Yeah, so this question here about transferring energy and when it comes back. So energy goes through a series of types in this process. It goes from, it's currently in me in chemical form from food I consumed. I am now going to transfer to the ball and change its form. I'll come back in a minute to what form it's in. It's in the ball now, and now it's going to come back into me. I can't turn it back into chemical energy easily. We're not designed to do that physiologically. So instead it goes into me and gets chopped up in little pieces and makes me warmer. So it's coming back to me as thermal energy. All right, so the forms of these energies. Energy shows up in two main categories of type. One of them is the energy that's associated with motion. So yet energy isn't necessarily about motion, but a moving object carries with it energy in the motion itself. And that energy is called kinetic energy, just from long history. So when the ball is moving, it has energy. It can do things it couldn't otherwise do. Again, it's got this conserved quantity of doing. And until it gives that energy away, it has to have it. So it's stuck with that energy. It's carrying. So that's energy in motion, kinetic energy. Another class of energy, actually the only other class of energy, is potential energy. And potential energy is energy stored in the forces within or among objects. So consider a spring. If you is that a bad choice? Because I wanted to get between two separate objects. Two separate objects, this ball and the earth. They pull on each other. They attract each other with gravity, right? So if I lift the ball, visualize it as me stretching a sort of a springy thing between the ball and the earth, that gravitational attraction. I'm stretching it. So the energy now is stored in that stretched gravity effect. So the name for that generally used is gravitational potential energy. We'll talk about other potential energies down the road, but gravitational potential energy is a good one to start with. And the amount of gravitational potential energy that this ball has, that's in the force between the two objects, is proportional to how high I lift it. Because it is the work I did in lifting it. So right now its gravitational potential energy is small. As I push it up, I'm doing work on it. The energy is going into gravitational potential energy. It's stored in the ball now. It's a little more complex because it's stored in the ball in the Earth system. And if I let go of the ball, as it begins to accelerate downward, what the ball is doing is it's converting its gravitational potential energy into kinetic energy. No energy disappears. It just changes form from gravitational to kinetic. And if you bounce it, it's going through a whole series of transformations from one form to the next. It didn't bounce to full height as we observed the other day, in part because some of the energy is not destroyed. It's just lost to the motion. It becomes thermal energy again. It will turn out that thermal energy is the wastebasket for energy universally. Lots of energy degrades into thermal energy and gets lost and useless. All right? So I can do a classic, simple but classic experiment here. You may well have seen this one before. Come back here. All right. So there's the bowling ball. It is currently motionless, so it has no energy in its motions. Kinetic energy is 0. And it's as low as it can go without breaking the string. So it has as little gravitational potential energy as it possibly can. Now, if I do work on it, I'm worried about this. If I do work on it, I can invest energy into it. So I can do work like this, right? I'm pushing it that way and it's moving that way, I'm doing work on it. That energy is showing up in gravitational potential energy. It actually went up a bit. It rose. Its altitude's higher than before, so it has more gravitational potential energy than it had before. And if I let go of it, it's now, it's so easy to hit stuff up there. It's now going through a cycle where it's got all of its energy in gravitational, kinetic, gravitational, kinetic, gravitational, kinetic. It's going back and forth. It's converting them back and forth. It's okay? Anyone? I'll invite someone to come here and who believes in conservation of energy to stand against the wall and release the bowling ball from rest in front of their face. Savannah, yes, sorry. All right. So, you get to stand here, and it's been plastered over here to get rid of the dent marks, okay? So, you get to hold it. And the idea is, I invested the energy. None of us should invest any more energy. Do not push. If you push, you will invest extra energy, okay? And you can release it, and it will go and convert to gravitational, kinetic, gravitational. Physics saved you, yes.
Coming again.
Yay, well, thank you very much. Yeah. If she had pushed, if Savannah had pushed the ball, exerting a force on it as it moved in the direction of the force, the ball would have swung farther. This is what you do on a swing set. You push the little kid. As they move away from you, invest energy into them, right? And if you do that, the ball has more energy than it was supposed to have, and it swings higher, and the dent marks, which are no longer visible, which is unfortunate, are from when somebody realized, uh-oh, it's going to come and get me. So, okay, and it did. All right, no one has been annihilated in this experiment here. So, all right, is everybody okay with why that works? Energy really is a conserved quantity. Yeah? What is lost when it slows down? So this thing will go back and forth, you're getting sleepy and all that. It'll go back and forth the rest of the hour, but it really will lose some amplitude. And that's because nature conspires to degrade energy, in effect, whenever it can. There are many reasons, basically frictions and air resistances and things related to them show up and gradually do negative work on it. Take the energy out of its motion, and where does the energy go? It goes into thermal energy. And just to preview thermal energy, you can find thermal energy yourself. Just rub your hands together. They get hot. You're actually, if you start looking at what you're doing work in various places, and energy is coming out of your breakfast cereal and going into your hands and then going into, and then it's gone. Where is it? It's in your skin, where it's been chopped up into little pieces, little bits of kinetic energy, little bits of potential energy, all scrambled up to the point where it's very hard to use them because you can't get them together to do something interesting. And it shows up instead as temperature. You get hotter. Damien? Is kinetic energy lost to thermal energy in vacuum? In principle, no. If you get to space where it's really empty enough and you're moving along at constant velocity, you'll just keep going at constant velocity essentially forever. There is no true empty space, alas. So even intergalactic space, turns out it occasionally has an atom or a fragment of an atom in it. So the Voyager spaceship, that I mentioned a couple times, the Voyager spacecraft have now drifted out of the solar system. They're out in intergalactic space now, within our galaxy, as opposed to outside our galaxy. They are still occasionally hitting a particle. And when they do that, they make a little bit of thermal energy out of what used to be their motion. So they're slowing down ever so slowly. They will, however, keep going for to the end of time. Other questions? Yeah, a pendulum clock. That occasionally, if you push the clock to get it going. We'll do pendulum clocks down the road. Pendulum clocks cannot the pendulum cannot keep going forever. I'll come back to this thing in a second, but the pendulum clock actually will degrade over the course of an hour or so. It will lose a good part of its swing. How do you keep it going? Well, don't use a ball, use a disc that slices better through the air. Try to cut down air resistance. So all the pendulum clocks you've seen do that. They try to make an aerodynamically streamlined pendulum. But even so, you can't keep it going forever. So what do? The clock mechanism gives little pushes to the pendulum once per swing. And it's just like pushing a kid on a swing set. And this is worth doing here, because someday, future, past, or yourself, you'll be on a swing set, or somebody will be on a swing set, you want to get them going. How do you get them going? Do work on them. You can do work one of two ways. You can take the little kid, push me, Uncle Lou, right? Okay, so you go, there, okay? And the little kid, disaster, right? You don't do that. I did do work on it. Big force, moderate distance, huge impulse of energy, or input of energy. Much better approach is, okay, we'll be gentle. Little push, little distance. Little push, little distance, right? I'm doing work each time. You wait until they're going away from you, so you can push on them as they move a distance directing your push. And finally, the ice cream truck comes by, and they want to get off. Of course they jump off, but you also can push them as they move toward you to slow them down. Take the energy out. I'm pushing one direction, it's moving, the kid's moving the other, I'm sucking the energy out. Okay? So what a pendulum clock does is it pushes once per cycle, or twice per, unclear whether it's both ends or one end, complicated, doesn't matter. But it gives a very gentle push as the pendulum's moving away, and adds a little energy to make up for the energy that's being ground up into thermal. All right? So some of you have seen in science museums what are called Foucault pendulums. So it's a big pendulum, typically as tall as you like. Science Museum of Virginia has one. That's like 25 meters high. It's huge. And it swings back and forth, and because of the rotation of the Earth in a somewhat complicated way, the swing direction gradually changes, and it knocks over little dominoes. So in principle, you can tell what time it is by which dominoes it's knocked over. So these Foucault pendulums, very popular. They're wonderful to watch. They will not go forever because of various frictional effects. Just the tiny flexures of that string matter. The air resistance clearly matters, and so on. So they won't go forever. So all the Foucault pendulums, secretly or not so secretly, have an energy. They add energy. They have some little mechanism there that gives the thing a little push to keep it going for day after day. Otherwise, they can go for like one day and that's it. Even in vacuum, people have made vacuum Foucault pendulums, and they still come to a stop. It's just too easy to waste the energy. All right? What is impulse? I use the word carelessly. I don't want to use it yet, but I will tell you, I'll give you a little preview. The word impulse shows up in physics. It is another mechanical means, in fact, the only means of transferring a conserved quantity. It's a conserved quantity that I've pretty carefully not used this semester yet, but it's in our near future. It's called momentum. So you know about, you heard the word momentum your whole life. It turns out momentum is another conserved quantity. Unlike energy, it's a conserved quantity with a direction to it. And it is the conserved quantity of moving, of going somewhere. So when I get started moving to the right, now, I'm carrying with me momentum to the right. And I can't stop until I give it to something, like the wall. So we'll do this with bumper cars. And the act of giving it to the wall was an impulse. That's the means for transferring momentum, is impulse. All right? So preview. It's really not here yet. How does Newton's cradle work? Newton's cradle, for those of you who don't know it, is a bunch of balls hanging from strings, and you swing one in, and it hits the row of balls, and the last one pops out and back. So I'll probably drag it out here when we do bumper cars. And it is an example of conservation of momentum, where the momentum that's put in by the first ball goes through all the other balls and knocks the last one out. All right? So back to the ramps to try to do justice to the ramp story. The ramp has this nice feature, and I'll stop this, otherwise I'll get hit by it and you'll be distracted by it. Now you can go back to being distracted by your laptop. All right, so it turns out that when I lift the wagon straight up, I use a large force for a small distance, and when I go along the ramp, I use a small force for a large distance. The product of the two, in each case, is the same. It takes the same work to lift the wagon straight up, using a large force for a short distance, as it does to push the wagon along the ramp. I'm pushing uphill, and as it's moving uphill, so it's moving in the direction of my force, but I need a smaller force with a bigger distance. Okay? And that's at the heart why ramp is interesting. And the shallower the ramp is, so if I drop the ramp to this, I now need a much longer ramp. I'll have to pretend it's there. To get the wagon to go all the way up the ramp, I have to keep going, it's like huge distance, very gentle force. All right? That situation where, I think of it as I'm exchanging force for distance. I'm doing something that, if it were a big enough wagon, piled full of kids, I couldn't lift it straight up. I'm not capable of doing it. So I can't use the big force short distance. Instead I go to the ramp, now I'm using a gentle force for a long distance. It's that exchanging force for distance is an example of mechanical advantage, just to give it a name. And in your world of K through 12, you've encountered mechanisms that offer mechanical advantage, that allow you to exchange force for distance and distance for force and things like that. Basically, you're doing the work that you want to do. For example, lifting the kids up 10 feet. But you're doing it with a different balance between force and distance, and that's the mechanical advantage idea. And most of the simple tools that you encountered over the years exhibit this mechanical advantage effect. For example, a wedge. When you shove a wedge into a log or something like that, you can move the wedge in a very long distance and have it only separate the log a little bit as the wedge gets wider and wider as it enters. So you're now, again, you're allowing a more gentle force to push the wedge in. You get a very small distance of movement. And how to complete the story. You're tearing apart the wood, which requires a huge force, but you're using a small force in an amplified distance to do it. And I'm going to leave it at that because I'm not pulling out the wording the way I want to. Another example, a lever. I'm a little hesitant about bringing up a lever, but we'll come there. With a lever, if you've ever tried to open a jar, for example, suppose you got the jar, you stick the jar on the table and you got a lid and you're trying to turn it by exerting forces on the lid to twist, and you can't get the thing to open. So what do? You strap on a kitchen instrument that grabs it and allows you to come out way out here with a long arm. And now you can rotate that. Well, you're doing the same work, and now I think I actually get this one clean. To open this jar, by touching the lid close into the center and pushing, you have to use a huge force exerted over a small distance to do the work of opening that lid. In fact, against typically the forces of friction, which we'll come to down the road. On the other hand, if you have a long lever, now you can use a gentle force out here, but you have to move much farther. So you have again exchanged distance for force. You're now using a gentle force to open the lid, but you need to travel a large distance to do the work of opening the lid. Okay, or questions about that? Not as clean as I'd like, but it's close enough. Weren't the Egyptians famous for using ramp technology in building pyramids? I think the answer is yes, as far as we know. I'm not sure is there any direct evidence that they used ramps, but they surely must have. Because to lift blocks that are 20 tons or something like that, going straight up is going to be rather difficult. So going along a ramp, you can now use fewer slaves pushing. All right? Yeah. So these various simple tools have been around forever, allowing people to do, essentially to do physics work with different balances between force and distance. I do want to say two more cents about ramps themselves, that if you put the wagon on the ramp just by itself, and suppose my hand wasn't here, I can't take my hand out of the picture because the wagon will obviously go. I want to make sure it's clear to everybody why there's a downhill force. Why is there a downhill force? We know that it's there because the wagon accelerates downhill. So the net force on the wagon when my hand is absent is downhill. That much I hope you're okay with. There are two, however, individual forces acting on the wagon that must together conspire to become this downhill force. The two forces are the weight of the wagon straight down and the support force from the ramp, which is perpendicular to its surface, namely in that direction. This direction, perpendicular to the surface. So there's a downhill force and an up and a downward force and an up to the left force. Those two can't cancel. They're not in opposite directions. So when you add them together, there's just no way you can get them to sum to zero. The direction just beats you. Instead, they sum to a residual value which happens to be right along the ramp in the downhill direction. And I call that the ramp force. And it gets stronger as the ramp gets steeper, until finally, when the ramp is completely steep, it becomes the full weight of the wagon. So it evolves smoothly from no ramp force. Let me get this out of the way for a second. When the ramp is not a ramp at all, the ramp force is exactly zero. The cancellation is perfect in this case. Support force is straight up. It perfectly cancels the wagon's weight. But as the ramp gets steeper, the cancellation gets worse and worse, and therefore the ramp force gets stronger and stronger. It's always downhill, but it gets stronger. And finally, it goes all the way to the full weight of the wagon, right there at vertical. A nice smooth evolution. All right. So, simple question. I will ask it as a clicker question. Wake up. Here it is. If I push uphill on the wagon just hard enough to balance the downhill ramp force, so I had a third force, I manually cancel the ramp force. So the net force on the wagon is zero. The wagon will do what? You okay with the question? So let me drag this over here. There. Let's go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. It's worth asking this question. I'll show you here. It's pretty much a split. Okay, so if I cancel the, we'll do this again. If I cancel the downhill ramp force, there are three forces now acting on the wagon. Grand total, they sum to zero, right? So the net force in the wagon is zero, and that's all we know. Net force is zero. Which of those two answers fits? So basically, what does a wagon do if the net force on it is zero? What's its motion like? I don't know how to make it any more clear. Try this one again, since you guys pretty much split the vote. Try it again. Talk about it among yourselves and see whether you can be sure of your answer. No guessing. I'll give you the 45-second mark. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And alas, it's still split. You guys are tough to convince one way or the other. All right. That said, then, I have no easy alternative but basically to answer it here. So let me do that. So I'm currently perfectly canceling the ramp force. Net force is 0. But is that the only possibility? Don't watch yet. Let me get going. I'm now perfectly canceling the ramp force. Net force is 0. It's moving at constant velocity. That's all good. Don't watch now. Let me get started again. Secret. Okay. No. Ready? Get set. Okay, now. I'm perfectly canceling the ramp force. The net force is 0, and it's moving at constant velocity. The point is, if I have the wagon at net force 0, that means it's not accelerating. But we have no idea what its velocity is. Its velocity has to do with history. What was it doing before the story started, which is why I'm hiding the story before it starts. If I tell you that at this moment, the net force on the wagon is 0, all you know is that it's not accelerating. You do not know its velocity. Its velocity has to do with what I was doing with it. And this is relevant to your problem sets. I don't have a ball. I have a water balloon. If you have a pinball on a ramp, if you put a pinball on a ramp, and that's the whole story. Pinball's on the ramp, what's its motion like? You have no idea whether it's going up the ramp or down the ramp or sideways. I didn't tell you. What you do know, though, is it's experiencing a ramp force. And it's accelerating in response to that ramp force. This is the robust little guy that didn't break last time, right? So if I let go from rest, it accelerates downhill very obviously and picks up speed. But if I let it go from heading up, it was still accelerating downhill. That's what things do on ramps. They accelerate down the ramp. The actual velocity depends on history. What was it doing before? You're okay with that idea? I mean, I'll say it 20 times and it won't get any clearer. Not serve a purpose. So objects on ramps accelerate downhill due to the ramp force. All right. Words about actually taking something up the ramp. So I've got the little water balloon in there. If I want to take up the ramp, we don't travel the whole ramp at constant velocity. Why? Because we start at velocity 0 and we end at velocity 0. So in the overall of pushing up something up a ramp, your grocery cart up the ramp to your car, say on the second level, you start not by canceling the ramp force, by pushing uphill. You actually have to push uphill a little extra hard. So there is a net force uphill on the wagon. So I actually have to push extra hard to start. Oh, okay, there I did it. And once it's moving, I don't have to do anything but support it against the ramp force. So I have to cancel the ramp force on the way up, and it moves at constant velocity as a consequence. At the very top, when I want to bring it to rest, then I push a little gently. I let it slow to a stop by not fully canceling the ramp force. So just to do it once cleanly here, to push something up the ramp, you start by pushing extra hard so that it accelerates up the ramp. You then continue by pushing just as hard uphill as the ramp force pushes downhill, so that it moves up at constant velocity. And at the end, you stop the wagon by pushing uphill gently, so that the ramp force wins. The net force on the wagon is downhill, because you're not pushing up enough, and it slows to a stop. All right? All right. A couple of questions that came in here. One is chemical potential energy. I told you that in lifting a ball, I take chemical energy that's in me from breakfast and turn it into gravitational potential energy by doing work. Where was the energy? It is a chemical potential energy. It turns out that between atoms and molecules, they can attract and repel one another. They pull together, they push apart in various ways, and there's energy stored in the forces between them as a result. So chemicals that have lots of energy, like gunpowder, have the way in which the atoms and molecules are arranged has stored energy in their attractions and repulsions. And in the act of burning the gunpowder or burning your breakfast food, that energy is released and it becomes some other form. And in this case, it becomes gravitational potential energy in the ball. All right? The other question is, would a ball have energy if there was no gravity? If there were no gravity here, lifting the ball up like this could occur with zero force. It would coast up. We didn't even have to push it. So the work I would have to do on the ball is zero. So it has nothing to store, and it won't store anything. There's no forces between it and nothing below us. So gravitational potential energy is only there if there is gravity. Get rid of gravity, it's gone. Go to a weaker gravity like the moon, and the storage rate is much slower. So lifting a ball this far on the moon would invest much less gravitational potential energy into it. Gravity's weaker. It doesn't store as much energy for that lift. All right, let me call it a day. I will be in Alderman Cafe this afternoon to talk about questions on the problem set. I'll remind you the problem set's due Friday at class time.